Welcome to Change Notice, everyone. This is a weekly video podcast for the Build Better community. If this is your first time joining us, here's the format. We do 20 to 30 minutes of interviews with our guests, which will be recorded for future posting, followed by 20 to 30 minutes of off-the-record discussion that you can only hear if you join us live. This week's guest is Pari Kumar. Pari leads the technical operations team at ChargePoint. He's primarily responsible for developing and deploying manufacturing lines for new products. Very important job. Prior to ChargePoint, Pari cut his operations teeth at Apple, where he split his time between Cupertino and China as a system TPM, shipping MacBooks, and also working on some other cool stuff. And at ChargePoint, he's helped to define and grow the global technical operations team. So really excited to have him here today, and excited to start off with maybe a little story behind the story, since folks like those. So yesterday, Pari, we both discovered that we each have a story about how Sharpie markers saved the day for us as engineers trying to get products ready for ramped. Can you share a little bit about the challenge and how you use Sharpies to save the day?
So the problem with MacBooks in general with like liquid crystal displays is something called light leakage. So light leakage is when you have a liquid crystal display, and if the display is under any sort of stress, then your liquid crystals are not perfectly aligned, and then you have light leaking through it. So if you are in a completely dark room and your display is supposed to be dark, you see little like corners like lighting up, and you're like, oh, what's that? So that's what light leakage or the problem is. And it usually happens because your display and your metal enclosure, they're not perfectly like the same shape. And it's like two potato chips that you're trying to smash together. And what we found out as we were doing the development, like it's just making these two shapes like meet each other perfectly and not have an issue and not have like light leakage to like the high display specs that Apple was holding was like very, very challenging. So the solution was to literally take a Sharpie, or like in the factory it was a snowman pen, and mark the edges, like literally mark the edges so that they are dark and there's less light leaking out through some of the corners or some of the edges of the display, like where you see like that black banner. And that's still how we did. You basically took that process and you deployed it at like the display vendor, and then when you rework the displays as well, or you have to like clean them, you literally had like snowman pens. They're basically Sharpies in the factory that you used to mark these displays up. And we were talking about that. It's like the exact same issue. And I was mentioning how you guys did the same thing in iPad as well, which is crazy.
on the 4th gen iPod Touch, which is a white touch. So it was like the first white product that actually went to production. We had a slightly different issue with light leakage in that it not only did it leak around the display, because there's often a plastic frame around the glass part of a liquid crystal display, but we didn't have space for it. So we kind of munched a lot of it out to like make space. So the light just came like right out the side, and then it hits like a plastic material that's filled with titanium dioxide, of course, to make it white, which is a diffusing material. So the whole thing glowed, like the whole product. The first one we put together was like a glowing iPod Touch, like the button glowed, the like frame glowed. It was actually kind of a cool SKU, and maybe we should have shipped that SKU, but that was not the vision of the product. And so yeah, we made use of Sharpies because that's what I had in my jacket, and that's what then ended up being like what was first qualified. And it was interesting because you can't buy industrial supplies of Sharpies, so you have to get them from Costco. And both Pari and I discovered that we learned that about Sharpies, and that they were sourced by GSMs from Costco's on the Western Seaboard and shipped to China. So interesting story behind the story about Sharpies, that we both had to like kind of reinvent the wheel on these particular challenges. But you know, those are good times. But like what's kind of funny about that is like, you know, engineers like us kind of celebrate the heroics of like figuring, you know, like, oh, well, we figured out this fix and it was crazy. And like, we had to buy Sharpies from Costco, and that they were like a vendor in the supply chain. But it's like actually kind of BS at the same time, if you step back for a second, because that's not really how electronics should be made. Like by the seat of the pants. And certainly, I'm sure that's not how things are done at ChargePoint. So maybe as as a transition to talking a little bit about building technical operations for a global team at ChargePoint, like that's a complex task in any environment. But the last 18 months have been particularly challenging for everyone. So tell us about how you've led and adapted your team during this time. Like what can you share about what you've been up to and kind of how you've led the team?
Absolutely, and yeah, you're not supposed to be doing this stuff by the seat of your pants. Some of it does happen. Another time, we use chopsticks to fix like a very, very complex piece of equipment for a very urgent build. Maybe sorry for another time. What we've done here, and especially since my time and when we came here, like there's definitely a change in our approach, right, and how we made our product as well. And like ChargePoint has been a growing company, and our approach of manufacturing, and our CEO has talked about it as well, right? We've moved all of our manufacturing to CMs at this point, and that's where all our products are made. And we had to make that transition or that shift as well. And how you develop product and you ship product is different from company to company. Like we have people and we have DNA from many great companies over here as well, right? We have a bunch of folks from Apple, we have folks from Google, Amazon, and so on. Like there are people from all over, and everyone has their approach or how they want to build product. And it's a very iterative process sometimes. It's like, oh, we did it like this, or we did it like this. And it's a lot of getting like a small group of people into a room and like kind of debating it and talking it through. On our side, sort of, and just when we were when we were getting to the point of like running some of the first hardware builds from our side, COVID came up, and we're like, oh wow, like how do we had an approach in mind where we're like, okay, we're gonna go bring up these factories, we're gonna send people, and we're gonna do these huge build events, and we had to really take a step back and kind of reevaluate how we handle it, right? And especially for when it comes to deploying these factories, there's a few things for me that are key, right? The NPI approach for the company itself, like how do you do NPI? Like how many cycles of prototypes? You do proof of concept, you do P1 through P whatever, and then you do an EVT, a DVT, a PVT. At what point do you bring in your C? Like define that, right? Then the second one, especially for deploying these factories, is having like a strong in-region team and an in-region presence as well, because those are the people that you rely on, right? Those are the people that that will eventually be like monitoring the factories as well. And I'll touch upon like how that changes with the change in like trying to do this stuff remotely as well, right? And third, like your partner, your CM, your contract manufacturer or JDM, and whatever approach you have, that picking that right partner for your company as well is absolutely critical, right? Because these aren't short-term relationships or short-term projects. Like you're like, oh yeah, we'll build a couple of projects or products. Like it's like this, you want to find partners that you can grow with and strategically deploy things with as well. And last but definitely not the least, it's like finding the right tools to use as well, right? To like having the right MES or the right test database or having the right inspection stations online to like be able to like capture the appropriate data. So when you're seeing failures, you're seeing issues, then you have like an easy way to go back and say, oh yeah, like this is exactly how we built this unit, this is the pedigree of it, and this is how it happened, right? And like for me, go ahead.
I was just gonna react. There's a lot there to react to. There's a lot of pieces there, so maybe we can dig into a couple of those pieces in like one layer down. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, a lot of leaders have asked us around or have shared at various points they're thinking about building out local support teams and building global teams. And I know this is something that you've thought about and spent a lot of time thinking about. And like, do you have any tactical advice for other leaders who are considering establishing new local teams that maybe there's not folks there already to support like technical operations for global supply chain?
That's a good question. Let me think, because it's on our side as well. It was iterative. And even before you get to that point, you need to establish your footprint first, right? You need to figure out because even when you deploy these in-region teams, you need to figure out where your factories are going to be, which countries, and then based on that, like, what sort of talent pool, like which subsidies have different talent pools.
Are you considering like the talent pool while you're considering the partners like together? Like, oh, we should, if we put this factory here, we're going to have all these other people we could hire directly to be local in-region support. Or like, oh, if we put the factory in the middle of nowhere here in this location, there's no local team that we'll be able to bring in.
Absolutely, because the way the way, and not just like ChargePoint, other companies as well, like the in-region team plays such a key role in it. Like you need to be able to like actually expand that, deploy that. So the city that you pick, that where you want your contract manufacturer or factories to be deployed, you want to make sure that there's a healthy talent pool there, and you can build out an organization there. I think hiring, we've talked about this before as well, is extremely difficult. I think you, as a team, we need to sit down and figure out like who are some of your like first key hires. And I definitely would recommend like you got to hire at least, we need to centralize it or have a lead, at least one person that you can kind of have that coordinates everything, even if it's multiple functions kind of reporting through it. And then once you're big enough, you can start splitting that out, and then you can say, okay, like we're big enough where you can have leads by different functions, and then really drive it home from there.
Is this something that like if some of this expansion, like pre versus post pandemic, I know you started at ChargePoint in 2019, so I don't know how much happened pre versus during, but like, you know, we've heard of some around like you kind of want to send someone there to like be with the local team and kind of like bridge the gap. That obviously can't happen during a pandemic. So like you probably had to adapt to like building those teams in a way that you might not have done before. Did you start any like totally fresh teams during the pandemic when no one was traveling, or had you actually already had some folks in place?
I think we were lucky enough that we at least had a few critical hires in our locations, and then we were able to, and we had spent time with them, we had flown over, and they had come here. Luckily, we didn't have to start anything like completely from scratch. Yeah, which I think, and then now like some semblance of travel is open again, so we're able to go back and forth. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how we would have handled it. Like to hire completely like from scratch would be, yeah, that would be challenging for sure. Luckily, we had some people on the ground who we had interacted with and who kind of knew how we work. We relied on them pretty heavily to kind of drive some of those decisions or make some of those decisions as well.
How are you thinking about, since we're kind of pivoting a little bit, you talked about tools as well, we're talking about people. So how are you thinking about scaling operationally with technology versus scaling with people? How should other leaders think about that?
So it's, for us at least, it's about identifying some of like the key metrics. Like we try to drive it from like, hey, what do we want to know from our factories? What are some of the key metrics we want to drive? And how do we get there in the least painful, like human intensive way possible, but still maintain like the integrity of the data, right? So like for factories, a lot, it's like, you know, what's your first pass? What's your final? What's your retest rate? What's your OE? And it's a lot about like identifying those top level metrics, aligning that with your CM, and then really like figuring out how do you best get to it. You get it from their MES, you get it from your own testers, you get it from some sort of like third party that you push data from, and then establishing that strategy and pushing for it.
Have you seen all of those work equally well? Like, is it very much something that gets tailor made, or is there one like obvious thing that people should just do?
I've seen a couple of different flavors of it. I've seen the like build your own, like do it yourself. Extremely painful to do, but if you have the horsepower to do it, then I'd say go ahead and do it, because I haven't found any great solution out there right now that says, oh yeah, that's awesome, go ahead and pick it. Because usually whatever we find off the shelf, there's always something or the other that we're not thrilled about, or we don't like, it doesn't work perfectly. Like there's even right now, there's things that we want to ever really like, we're piecing together information from like 4 or 5 different systems. The data is getting cleansed from one to another, and then we're like kludging that together to be like, okay, that's the right picture. And it's dependent, it's still dependent on like the humans, the people behind it saying, like, yeah, I have a good pulse on this. Like, that's accurate. That makes sense. So it's a lot of, there's still too many dependencies for my comfort. I know, and we've come a long way, even in the past 2 years with that, but it's still, I know we can do much better.
Got it. And then you talked a little bit about tools and making sure people have the right tools. What processes, like given this, like kind of, you know, at various stages of remote, although we've always manufactured remotely, like, but like not being able to be there, I think is the new flavor. So what processes did you change that worked really well? That like are, you know, kind of tactical or things that you could share with others?
I think one of the big things, we talked about like the in-region team and your partners, obviously, like you got to make sure that that infrastructure is there and that's robust. But the other thing is also like your approach on the build itself. We've had cases when even when you typically do a build, like you're iterating early on locally wherever you're based, and you're building all these prototypes and you're using 3D printed parts and whatever to kind of validate your design. But what we also did was like ship full sets of parts to our office like at the same time as we were planning to build in the factory. And instead of doing like some of the initial validation builds in the factory, we did some of them here ourselves, and we're like, okay, like these are the parts we're going to build with in the factory. Like that way you identify, like you can do like your IQC and you can validate like the parts and say like, oh yeah, this part needs to be reworked.
You like a mini build or like an SOP build essentially?
Basically, like we did a bunch of pre-work, but we built them up here. We got them into engineers' hands to like turn them on, test them and say, yeah, things work. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Or like, here is the laundry list of issues that we've caught that need to get resolved. So the factory is doing some of that, but we're like running ahead of them to say, no, like we have a clear picture of what needs to be done, or wow, this, like what needs to get resolved for us to move forward. And at least I think that it gets us to like the 75-80% of the issues, and then now it's a normal, like, yep, let the factory run, find the remaining painful like 20%, right?
Got it. Is that something you think you'll keep, like that change? Is that how you'll run when travel is unrestricted? Like what will you keep and what will you jettison?
I think we will definitely keep it to a certain extent, just to, and that's something that we have to figure out on ourselves, right? As we go through these NPI cycles, like what worked, what didn't work, and what we want to keep. I think, to me, I thought that worked really well. We would definitely keep that and have some set of parts, or the volume, the number of units we send, or the number of piece parts we send might be different. And it's not trivial to do, right? Sending a full BOM from one factory to another, it is painful, but I think we would still keep it, because I think there was significant value in doing that.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the check model build. We used to do a check model build at Apple before we would fly out for EBT or whatever. You'd get like machined perfect. They weren't the exact same parts, but they were like the perfect parts. And occasionally you would find out that your pin ones were wrong, or that you'd find out that like, oh, this interferes, and you find out like early enough that you might be able to do something about it. So there's kind of some usefulness in that. And it sounds like in this case, it helped to like grease the skids for things that would like the factory might encounter on even the SOPs and things like that. I can imagine would be really difficult to, you know, debug like, oh, the parts aren't fitting, and you have your own parts and you're like, they fit fine for us. You got to like tilt it in, like, dude, like goes like this. Like you don't just go like this, it goes like this.
Just adjust it, like a little bit of tape here and just hold it this way. I'll go ahead. This is like the big difference from like a check model build from this one is like it is the actual same parts. It is so the exact same parts.
If you have warped enclosures, you'll find that out.
Yeah, it's some sort of like someone didn't burr some like edge. Like, yep, okay, we'll find that out. Like, it's the exact same parts, and it's because we like even the check model builds. Like, we did even at Apple, we did those at CMs. Like, we sent like 3D printed parts, machine parts to the factory. We had automated equipment on the line to do a check model build at a factory. It was kind of insane. Anyways.
Okay, got it. So I guess like as an operations leader building out your supply chain of manufacturing partners, What can you share about what you kind of prioritize in your selection of like what makes a great partner? Like what do you look for as a leader in your manufacturing partners?
I mean, you have all your obvious ones, right? The technical capability, the match, like based on your size, the size of your company, and they're like, you're not gonna, as like a very small company, you're not gonna go to one of the tier ones and be like, oh, I want this. Like they're not gonna give you like time of day, right? But some of the things that you can tend to miss is like the transparency with the team up front and establishing that relationship up front. Because I've definitely noticed it in some cases where, and it's not just CNs, but other suppliers as well. And you're like, oh, we want like this huge, like we want this, we want all these different things, and these are our expectations. And it's a lot of, yeah, of course, yeah, like we had that lab. Yep, we do this. Yep, we do that. Everything. Yes, yes, yes. Like, oh, of course. And then when you actually go and try to do a product, it's like, oh, right, yeah, the lab is 100% utilized. You need to wait 6 weeks to get anything done. Okay, if you want this, that comes with a bill. You want this, that comes with another bill. Like if you want this, like your whole like the MPA model and the cost model goes out the window, right? So it's being upfront about a lot of that and being like, no, like this is what we expect, and this is like the baseline expectation. Like really hashing that out early and upfront with your partners is absolutely critical.
Are there different? I mean, so I know there's several different business models in which companies can operate with their partners. And like, do you have from all your experiences, do you have like a preference, or have you seen multiple, like, is there a best practice in terms of kind of hashing that out, like the right commercial model, or have you seen different models all work with different partners, but it really is about selecting the right fit for the right partner?
I think it's the latter. It's like selecting the right fit for the right partner. I don't think there's like, this is the perfect recipe and this is how it works, because for the products like I'd say mid to high complexity products and mid to high volume, assuming, and because of the company as well, right? Like what level of tech you have and what level of expertise you have. Like if you're a company that's gonna draw something on the back of a napkin and be like, hey, I want this, like please make me this. Like, yeah, okay, go JDM. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But if you're like a deeply technical company and you have like that's your expertise, then you want to be more on the CM model where you leverage their expertise and their economies of scale for your best benefit, but you still hold sort of that core technical expertise on your side.
Does anything about like the way manufacturing works, particularly electronics manufacturing today, seem backwards to you? We were talking a little bit yesterday about like on-premises systems for you went on a little bit of a rant on that one. I don't know if there's anything else that you might want to talk about that seems just like a little bit backwards.
I think, yeah, I don't want to go on a rant for that again, but I think simply put, like some of the way we have some of our software, or like more of our soft tools, like the MES and the tester tracking and all that stuff, like the way they're deployed right now is pretty backwards. I'm not a fan of on-premise solutions where you do like an SAP implementation. It takes like 18 months to deploy multiple millions of dollars. And then by the time it's deployed, like everything has changed. So now you're talking about the upgrade, which is going to cost you another like 500,000, if not a couple $1 million again. And you have a team. Yeah, that needs some overhauling for sure. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what product you're making, or like the data that you're expecting off of a factory. Some of that can easily be standardized.
Yep. Makes sense.
I think that's my biggest pain point. If you're gonna ask me.
Oh yeah, biggest pain point is just like getting access to that information, or
it's getting access to that information in a clean way, and getting that clean snapshot of your factory. Because the rest of this, like how we develop product, I think we're like different people are experimenting with it. There's like an influence from like software development side on how you're more agile about it versus following more of your waterfall path. Like I think there's plenty of good conversation there. We're using tools like Jira, like different bug tracking tools to kind of make all this remote work. Like this, the whole COVID thing has been an accelerator for that kind of stuff as well, right? Like we were forced to like, oh, everything goes through Jira. Like we track bugs, everything has a picture, everything like is tracked. Like we need it. Like that was awesome. Like otherwise, it would have taken an extra like 6 to 8 months before.
So you mentioned something really interesting, which is that like some of the software agile methodology is like seeping into hardware, and you're seeing that on your side. What do you think of, there are companies that like haven't seen that start happening in their own businesses yet. What is like one tangible kind of thing that like is a major win from like you're starting to see that happen in your operations? Like what's a tangible win? Like is the Jira tracking like a tangible win that you've seen that you'd recommend to everyone from the rooftops, or is there something else that's kind of like, oh yeah, this is way better than the old waterfall way?
I think the tangible win, like I think Jira and like using Jira and like a tool like Confluence, like to do like all the documentation, like basically documenting your work, tracking your bugs, and then actually following through and closing on them would be like that coming from like the software side of the discipline, or at least having the discipline to go close everything up. Definitely a big win. I think one that we're all kind of poking at and getting to is more like how do you intelligently leapfrog build events? How do you let the technical teams iterate faster? And while you do some of the more long-term events, like you branch off of your main sort of development, and then you're like, hey, this guy's going to be this branch, and we're going to validate just this, and don't bother them, and like let this one develop by itself, and you take versions off of it. I think getting to that will, if we can figure that out in a way that works for our company, I'll be happy.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought about branching of hardware development. But
you can cycle or iterate very, very quickly.
Yeah, module builds can be really helpful. The issue is well, I mean, you just do a PRQ to put the kind of post ramp qual to put them all back together at the end. But like makes sense. I think that there could be an opportunity there to accelerate innovation that might not make the main schedule, or there's like science with a capital S that needs to happen still. So you don't want to hook it on to your main branch and the thing that's got to hit the schedule, but like could be really powerful if you could get it. Really interesting. So maybe as a last point, for peer leaders out there working to build operational scale, like you're doing at ChargePoint, what advice do you have? What's one tactical change other leaders should consider making that you think has had like a big impact for you as a leader?
One tactical change.
Yeah, for operational scale.
Yeah, that's a tough question. What do you think?
Give us your juiciest tidbit.
I don't know if there's like a single juicy tidbit that I can give. At least and I wish there was like a better, like, oh yeah, just go do this next like thing, and you will solve all your woes. For me, it was hiring the right people. Honestly, like more than anything, it was like just finding and hiring the right people helped more than anything.
When you say right people, what do you mean? Do you mean like having the right organizational design in the first place, or do you mean like finding the right fits for each of those roles?
Good question. Define your organization, define sort of your key roles that you need, right? To like, okay, I am going to pick the CM model. I am going to pick the JDM model. In order to achieve this model, I need X, Y, and Z talent. And then go fill your leads, go get those leads to go make that happen. And then it's as long as you get the right people in there, I think you'll be successful.
And how, like, what's a tactical tip for, like, it's easy to say like just hire A players, but that's like not super helpful. So like, what's a tactical tip for like how do you identify, or like what's one thing or a question you can ask, or an activity you can have a candidate do to identify someone who'd be really great in an operational role?
We tend to rely on our network a lot, like people like recommending people or saying like, yep, I worked with them for a couple of years or whatever, that they were good at X, Y, or Z. We've switched some of our interview processes to also include some sort of project or something to like more than just like, hey, do 30 minutes with 8 people. It's like, hey, come in, present on this, like we'll give them a challenge like a week before, 2 weeks before, and say, hey, we want you, this is the problem statement, like if it's for like a TPM, it's like, hey, this is a problem statement. We want you to go design a line for this Lego toy. Like, see what you come back with. And we come back and we see what level of detail they come back with. Like there's people on the program management side who will give us all of these like very complicated schedules. They're more like technical folks who like, yep, you know, when it comes to the wheel alignment, like I'm going to use the laser here, I'm going to do this or that. So you get a much better sense of like what their strengths are and like what, and based on what you need, then you can figure out if they work or not.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here this week. And thanks, Pari, for sharing, dropping some wisdom and sharing with other leaders.